Hello? Hey, how many times do I have to tell you? Keep the noise down when you open and close the door. What? I'm sorry. Was it really that loud? If it wasn't, I wouldn't be calling, would I? Seriously? How many times do I need to repeat myself? The call was abruptly ended. Despite the brief exchange, it was utterly draining. How many times had I had this same conversation with our next door neighbor? My family and I aren't trying to be loud. My name is Leone, 37 years old. I work in sales administration for a medical equipment company. My husband Larry is on a solo assignment overseas, so it's just my 13-year-old son Steve and me at home. We live in an older apartment, but the location is great, so we love it. But there's one recent problem. A woman who moved in next door keeps lodging complaints against us. Even this weekend, the doorbell rang repeatedly, and I approached it with trepidation. How many times do I need to tell you to be quiet when you open and close the door? I'm really sorry. I wasn't trying to slam it. That's not my problem. Just be considerate, alright? Seriously. She just yelled and left. Her name is Dina. She's a housewife in her 40s with a high school-aged child. I remember feeling a bit intimidated by her sharp gaze when we first met. As I expected, the aggressive complaints are non-stop, especially on weekends. I told you not to stomp around in your apartment. It's so disruptive. I'm sorry. I'll be more careful. Come on. It's not just you living here. I genuinely believe we aren't causing any noise disturbances. Of course, my son Steve is a quiet kid, probably even quieter than the other units. In reality, I secretly think Dina's place is way more of a nuisance. Her high school-aged daughter, Vivian, loves blasting her music, and the sound leaks terribly. Even Dina's phone conversations are so loud they penetrate our walls, yet they turn a blind eye to their noise, while always pointing fingers at us. Especially in an old apartment, it's essential to be considerate of each other. It's bad enough when she rings the doorbell, but it's genuinely terrifying when she bangs on our front door. Your conversation is too loud. Please lower your voice. Yes, I'll be careful. Sorry. You know my legs are bad. It's already a hassle just to come out here. I see. So don't make me come to your door every time. Just give me your cell phone number. Okay. From that day on, the complaints started coming over the phone. I deeply regretted giving out my number on impulse. No matter if it was a weekday or a weekend, she didn't care. Turn down the TV! I can faintly hear it and it's driving me crazy! Yes, sorry. Is this volume okay? Keep all the noises down to this level! Seriously! I heard from the landlord that Dina's husband is also working away from home. We're in a similar situation. We should get along better, but the complaints and demands from Dina just escalated. The vacuum is too noisy. What kind are you using? Replace it. I just got a new one last week. It's supposed to be quiet. Ugh, it doesn't sound quiet. At least vacuum on Sunday mornings when I'm out shopping. With our relationship being like this, there's no way our kids would get along. One day, when Steve sneaked back into the house, "What happened, Steve? Did someone chase you?" "I don't want Vivian from next door to see me. She might get rough." "Rough? Did she do something to you?" "She's too hands-on, and she tries to get me to buy her soda with my allowance." Vivian doesn't have a great reputation. I've heard she hangs out with a group of self-centered, troublesome kids. The day after hearing that rumor, when I returned from work, Steve was sitting near our apartment entrance, hugging his knees. "Steve, what happened? You can't stay out here." "Yeah, I'm sorry. I lost my keys." From what he told me, Vivian and her friends confronted him on his way home from school. They dragged him to a nearby park, making him play games he didn't want to. They took things from my pockets, threw my stuff around. Oh my god! As Steve recounted, tears welled up in his eyes. For the high schoolers, it might have been just a pastime, but for Steve, it must have felt like torture. When he realized he'd lost his keys, how devastated he must have felt. He probably searched the park over and over. He must have felt so alone and scared. I couldn't contain my anger. I rushed outside and furiously rang Dina's doorbell. When Dina appeared, her eyes were cloudy. She had already been drinking. "What's up?" "My kid told me they had a run-in with your Vivian." "Really? Kids will be kids, you know. Stop making a fuss about it. I won't let this go. Ensure she doesn't bother my child again." She briskly closed the door after speaking her mind. I heard Dina shouting something, but I didn't want to hear it. From that point on, our relationship with Dina became even more strained. She began banging on our shared wall and tossing trash on our balcony. Talking to the apartment manager didn't seem to help. Dina wouldn't change her behavior. "This is quite a predicament," sighed the apartment manager, scratching his head. "I've had similar complaints about her. I've told her not to disturb the peace here, but it doesn't get through. She sure doesn't take advice well. If the apartment manager can't get through to her, what chance do I have? I guess her husband's away on business? Maybe she's just lonely," the manager pondered. "But that's no excuse to hassle the neighbors." "True, it's not right. I'll talk to her again." Is she so lonely with her partner away that she's resorting to making complaints and drowning her sorrows in alcohol? If that's the case, it's genuinely heartbreaking. But I can't fathom dealing with stress in such a way, yet Dina's complaints continued relentlessly. Even when we thought we were quiet, she'd always find something to nitpick. Thanks to her, we never got a moment of peace. The thought that the constant complainer next door might be eavesdropping kept us from even laughing freely. Recently, there have been loud knocks on our front door in the evenings. When we checked the security footage, it appeared to be Vivian's doing. The knocking continued until the apartment manager threatened to evict her. With such overwhelming stress, day in and day out, both Steve and I were totally drained. One day, I phoned my husband Larry, who was overseas, to fill him in on the situation. It's just, I can't believe, of all people, she moved next door. Is that what's been happening? How about Steve? Any more issues with the girl next door? I think it's better now. Probably thanks to the apartment manager laying down the law. We've told Steve to consult the property manager in emergencies, like if he loses his key. I felt guilty burdening Larry with this while he was on a work trip abroad. Being away, he might worry even more, but I had to share my feelings. I felt like I'd fall apart if I didn't talk to someone. That's when Larry spoke up. "If you're feeling down, maybe you should take a break to de-stress." "De-stress? My business trip will be over soon, right? Work's been easing up. I have some free time now." "Are you suggesting—" "Yeah. What do you think? It's a great place here." A few days after that conversation, my cell phone rang. It was from Dina. I wondered what was going on and answered. "Hey! How many times do I have to tell you? The noise from the kids is too loud! Do something about it!" "What? Kids?" "Yes! Think about the neighbors! Fix this, now!" Dina sounded slurred. Probably drunk. She kept shouting without really hearing me. Trying to calm her down and get her to focus was a challenge. "Please listen. I'm currently abroad with my child." "What?" "I'll hang up for a moment and contact the apartment manager." Panicking, imagining the worst, my hands trembled as I operated my phone. Fortunately, the apartment manager answered right away. "Hello? Oh yes, it's about apartment 302. Yes, that's right. Maybe..." The apartment manager had noticed something odd about my place almost at the same time I did. He found it strange that the lights were on even though I was supposed to be on a trip. He assured me he'd call back once he figured things out. About 30 minutes later, the news from the apartment manager was pretty much as I feared. The apartment was swarming with police officers, and we had no choice but to return home immediately. When my child and I arrived back at the apartment, both the apartment manager and Dina were there to greet us. Dina looked utterly defeated. "I'm so sorry for what my daughter did." Right. It was Vivian and her friends who had broken into our apartment and created chaos while we were away. After Steve had been harassed by Vivian and her crew, he realized he lost his key. Turns out Vivian had stealthily taken the key from Steve's belongings. Sometime after that, Vivian got wind that we'd be away from our apartment for a long time. She might have overheard my conversation with the apartment manager. Seeing us leave for our trip, she and her friends seized the opportunity to sneak in. They partied so hard that eventually a police officer had to step in. Our apartment was a mess. Vases and mirrors were shattered, wallpaper torn, and graffiti was everywhere. There were discarded candy wrappers, instant noodle cups, juice cartons, and plastic bottles all over. The police officer had instructed that everything be left as it was until we returned. Seeing the state of the apartment, forgiveness wasn't an easy option. Regardless of it being a child's mischief, there were clear boundaries crossed. I'm so sorry. I'll help clean up. Thank you. I'll pitch in too. We immediately began tidying up. Apart from essential communication, I hardly spoke to Dina. I wasn't the kind to get chummy after such an incident. She sensed that and focused solely on cleaning. After a while, the parents of the other kids who had trespassed along with Vivian arrived. Each one of them apologized profusely. I accepted their apologies sincerely. A police officer arrived around the same time and updated us on the details. When the police arrived, there were 4 girls in the apartment, including Vivian. All of them stopped their antics and sat down properly after a stern warning from the apartment manager. All 4 of them are over 18, so they can be held criminally responsible. I was told that the 4 of them were currently detained at the local police station. Whether they'd remain in custody would be up to the prosecutor and the judge. I had spoken to the authorities, emphasizing that these were just kids, most of them still in school. Being arrested and detained is traumatic for anyone, especially for the young ones. I believed they shouldn't face harsh penalties. The discussion shifted towards settling things outside the courtroom. The apartment manager would assess the damages for broken windows, mirrors, and wallpaper. All I had to decide was the compensation for the damages and my emotional distress. The bill would go to Vivian's mother, Dina. The financial burden would be shared equally among the 4 families, each reimbursing Dina. By the time our negotiations and cleanup were wrapping up, I saw a large black van pull into our complex. A tall, imposing man and Vivian stepped out. Could it be? My hunch was right. The man was Dina's husband. He had a strong and commanding presence, and didn't seem like someone from a traditional office job. He seated both Dina and Vivian next to him, and turned to me. We sincerely apologize for all the trouble my reckless wife and foolish daughter have caused. He repeatedly expressed his regret, almost to the point where I felt embarrassed. I lost count of how many times I told him it was okay and to stop apologizing. Dina and her crew left shortly after, continuously apologizing. 2 days later, Dina and Vivian moved out. I initially thought it was just the movers, but when I checked, Dina told me she was moving in with her husband. I had been reluctant because his new job is in a very rural area, and I didn't want to go, she said. But after the recent mess, she didn't feel right staying here. She decided to join her husband. If this ordeal brought their family closer together, then perhaps it was for the best. As a wife with a husband on a solo assignment, I genuinely felt that way. I sincerely hoped that living with her strong-willed husband would keep Dina on the straight and narrow, and that Vivian might mature a bit. A few days after that, with my windows and walls back in pristine condition, my husband Larry returned from his trip. My son, Steve, and I went to the airport to greet him. Larry's overseas assignment was over, and our family of 3 was together again. I wouldn't have to face any more unsettling nights alone for a long time. The recent events reminded me of the importance of having family close. Life is truly better when we're all under the same roof. That was my heartfelt realization.